First and foremost, that foundation of stewardship, I think, is formed in identifying and solidifying that relationship between gift and giver. And so I think as a man, I think by God, we're given dominion, we're given responsibility with a family. But I think there's a time, and I'm wondering if we lose that with a rite of passage thing in our culture that other cultures or religions have more overtly, where there's a time, it's not because you turned 13, 15, 18, it's because there's been a formalizing of, hey, now you're because you are this age, because you've gone through this ceremony, this whatever, you now are on the hook for these things. Do you accept? Do you choose to participate?
Welcome to Authentic Conversations. I'm your host, Ryan James Miller, and I believe the way to freedom, fulfillment, and success ultimately comes by living as the most authentic version of yourself. If you're ready to live the life you've dreamed of, you're in the right place. All right, what up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Authentic Conversations. I have a new but good buddy with me by the name of Sam Feeney. Sam, look at that. I'm already tearing his name up, and it's so easy to say.
It's the hardest part of my name.
Yes. So good. We're not even going to edit that out. I'm going to let everybody hear how quickly I can screw things up. It is. There it is. Sam's a father of 5. Not going to get that wrong. A husband of 15 years. He's a podcaster. He's an author, and he is building an amazing community through this book project and podcasting platform for men. We may get into some of that today. He is a brother in the Iron Sharpens Iron mastermind that I'm a part of. That's where Sam and I kind of first collided, was through a mutual introduction there. We met in person a few months back, which was wonderful to be able to do that and spent some time together, had some conversation there. And now I get you on the podcast. So thank you, man.
Natural progression of things. I love it.
So good. So good. All right. So I'm going to kick this right off. I try to do this as often as possible. So this season of the podcast, I've been talking to predominantly men. I've had one woman on. She was fantastic, but most of it's been by the men, for the men. The ladies that are listening for their men to bring it back to them.
Absolutely.
So on that topic or that theme, to you first, I would love to know. So there are lots of definitions for and thoughts around this idea of men and manhood and masculinity. There is distortion everywhere as it relates to that. But if someone was to ask you, Sam, or as I'm asking you right now, like, how would you define manhood?
Stewardship.
Like that easy?
Long. That's it, man. Because I think about this all the time, because everything for me falls into that idea of stewardship. So one of my core values is legacy. And I believe that whenever I started making decisions on my own, my legacy began, which means I got to go back and apologize to my kids for a lot of what I did in college, because it was a terrible example. But that's my legacy began. I always kind of ballpark like 12. Your legacy begins, you're writing it every day. But it's a legacy of stewardship. Another way I think about being a man is about leadership, but that's also stewardship, because it's accounting for what you've been given and being able to set that course and be able to, you've got to make a decision as a steward where to best allocate your resources, right? If you think about it in a financial sense or a managerial sense, and we're leaders and stewards in what we do. And so I think that's something that's been lost, but I'm really dialing in on it more and more, largely through my kids, but also through, as we were talking about before we hit record, some of the decisions that I make on, how to use my talents and my energy and my time. So I think stewardship is a great place to start for guys. And I don't think that's something we talk a ton about.
Okay. So I love that. I don't think that anybody so far in the 20 or 25 episodes that we've been rolling this season has said it that simply. And yet that's just such a loaded single word. And I know the answer to this question to some degree, having conversation with you outside of this, but okay. So that's a pretty broad word in a sense, right? So, stewardship, this opportunity to do with, what you've been given. And so how do you gauge that? Like, is there a foundation that you see first that comes from? So that's going to guide principle around, on how you steward what you've been given. Is there a lens that you look through? How do you measure outcome? So there's a lot of things there, but maybe start with like, where does that foundation begin for you? Because I think that if we don't know where it's coming from, I think it's hard to understand what we do with.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think it's like a lot of other words that stand in and of themselves on their surface, like, okay, that makes sense. Like marriage, or, we could, whatever it is, like a sport, like, okay, when my kids are learning football right now. So I'm like, oh, football, you watch a game, you're like, oh, the ball should move in that direction. And but then you start to study it and you're like, man, there is so much more going on under the surface that those who know get, and those who don't know always see it at a surface level. So I would say stewardship is fairly similar in that way, where by talking about stewardship, you automatically bring into play certain dynamics. And, so one of them is, if there's a gift given and you're acknowledging that, then there's a giver, right? There's an understanding there. And I think a lot of times, I think one of the most important things men can do is to accept the role as a steward of what they've been giving, and have that be a very intentional thing. And so in that, you're really solidifying the relationship between the gift and the giver, and being able to say that this is something I'm willing to take on. And a lot of times I think because we don't name that, a lot of people, a long time ago, I realized, and this is actually in my early career as a teacher, I met a number of kids who had just a lot of life happen to them. And they were accepting responsibility for, the one guy's 17, he's got a 1-year-old kid. Like the other guys, nobody in the house works. He's working 2 jobs. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking about my college buddies who are just drifting. I'm realizing how much maturity is tied to our responsibility, how much we choose to respond to the things around us rather than just bail. Mm-hmm. And so first and foremost, that foundation of stewardship, I think is formed in identifying and solidifying that relationship between gift and giver. And so I think as a man, I think by God, we're given dominion, we're given responsibility with a family. But I think there's a time, and I'm wondering if we lose that with a rite of passage thing in our culture, that other cultures or religions have more overtly, where there's a time, it's not because you turned 13, 15, 18, it's because there's been a formalizing of, hey, now you're because you are this age, because you've gone through this ceremony, this whatever, you now are on the hook for these things. Do you accept? Do you choose to participate? And so I think we get a lot of this stuff that rolls into waking up one day and realizing like, okay, I'm in my 30s. I'm doing a bunch of stuff, but there's not really much I'm responsible for. Why I'm still feeling like a kid, like this is the classic Biff Loman, Death of a Salesman character. He's got the age part, he's got a ton of talent, but there's no responsibility. There's no maturation. And there's forever, he's in Arrested Development from a dad who never gave him that stuff. It's like 18 cans of worms I just opened on that.
No. I think what's so great about that, I've really struggled over the years because, for me, faith in God has been a significant component to my life since 2006. Before that, it was not. I mean, it was kind of there, but not really. And so, that shaped so much of my understanding about my own life and how I live and how people live. And yet I've always kind of swung back and forth between how much do I put this? I mean, I live out my own faith personally, very publicly, but how much of it do I insert into what I'm doing, because I don't want to proselytize, people that don't, they need it, but they don't need it in the moment, right? Like there's just a sense of like, we need to build on this. Anyway, so I've kind of vacillated back and forth between those things. But one thing that I've struggled with lately, and it actually really comes into play here, is if I've accumulated, I want to get into a maturity and wisdom gain in something else. But for now, like if I've accumulated a bunch of stuff, and it's by way of luck, if I believe that I've gotten lucky,
right.
and so it's there, or if I've accumulated it simply by my own hard work and the opportunity that I've created for myself, then I don't feel like there is a definitive responsibility to do anything with that for anybody else but myself. Because if it's luck, but that's been done to me, some people will say they tie that into kind of karma. And so it's like, because I got lucky, I want to like give that to somebody else, which sorry, but that's just terrible garbage to me. There you go. On the other side, when it's really hard work, people are like, I've worked really hard for this, so this is mine. And I'm not saying that people that don't live in one of those worlds don't give to other people. They absolutely do. But ultimately, I do believe that the central opportunity and foundation for us to steward what's been given to us is when we understand that it's been given to us intentionally for a purpose. And the only way it could be given to us intentionally would be by being given to us by somebody else. We say God, for purpose. Well, there's very few things that can give us purpose in life that are greater than the clarity that God gives us in purpose. So I see that, and I know that that's a big part of your life and your background too. But I don't see how we can gain a good framework for stewardship outside of an understanding that it came from the God that created everything and all things, and is the one that guides and directs every breath we take and every move we make. My ode to the police right there.
Oh, I thought you meant to protect and serve. I know who you're talking about now. I got you.
So, right? Like, do you feel that?
It's a tough nut to crack. And it's so funny. I was just talking to my wife about this last week. And I really think it was just like, kind of like right place at right time. But there's certain things like when you have you're talking about like, what's your lens for stewardship, right? So when you start to think, man, if I'm a steward, what am I a steward of, right? You start to kind of see things. And I remember it's got to be 10 years ago. I'm watching the bonus footage on Band of Brothers. No, I apologize. Saving Private Ryan. And so we're going through that, and Tom Hanks is sitting on the scene, where they shot the last scene in the rubble from the whatever town they're in and the whole thing. They're interviewing him like, basically, you've got a pretty great career, right? You started out with Bosom Buddies and Splash and, all this stuff. And now you're sitting here and you've got 2 Oscars under your belt and like all this stuff. And he said something that struck me that really helped me redefine how I think of stewardship, although I didn't realize at the time. And he's like, yeah, I've been really fortunate. I thank my lucky stars. And I was like, oh my gosh. Inherent in gratitude is a recognition of God. And he, for the first time, he is not a believer, right? He's like, crap, I don't have anybody to thank. But so I think stewardship starts with gratitude. The formula for stewardship is starting by being grateful. Because when you're grateful, you have to eventually get to God. And philosophically, I have a theory. I'm just trying to alienate as many people as possible. I have a theory that nobody doesn't believe in God. They don't want to. Yeah. Right. So because there's something internally, probably the relationship with their dad, there's something internally that says, I know I'm not going to go down the road. So I know, but gratitude is the same way. And you can look elsewhere, but if you continue to peel back those layers of the onion, you're going to find that it's probably God at the root. And I'm fine with infinite intelligence, universe, whatever it is. Like I think we probably minimize God by calling him God and by calling him and all the other stuff. But like, there's something more there. And so I think stewardship starts with gratitude. And I think it's unfortunate because men are about the least grateful group of people you can meet. So unfortunately, the prereq for being a real man is being grateful. So you're like, man, that's a non-starter. I'm going to go watch TV.
That's really good. And I mean, I think that it's so perceptive that, again, we do, as we reduce that further and further down, we have to see it comes from someplace. And I I agree with what you said about, I don't think there's anybody that does not believe in God, particularly in Western culture. We've all been exposed to it. And there's obviously we do believe in God, all believe that it is inherently created inside of us, some knowledge of God. And it's some scar, some hurt, some alienation that has caused people to not believe. But
can I interject 1 second there?
Yeah, go.
Who's a better steward than God?
Yep.
And if you identify, so the 7 core areas of Made to Thrive, which we can talk about later if you want, I was in the same journey as you. I wanted to get rid of faith and I couldn't do it because faith leads to identity. Identity leads to mission.
Yeah.
And that's a stewardship journey. And I wanted to take it out. I wanted to keep it out. I'm like, oh no, like I want to do something more palatable. And I couldn't get out of it. And so that's where funny. I think if we're an imager, an image bearer, not just in the image of what we are, if we're designed to reflect as the moon reflects the sun, you can't get around the fact that that's some pretty dang good stewardship.
It's so funny that you say that. And I love how we're down these holes, but I was facilitating a leadership development workshop just this past week. It'll be a couple of weeks by the time the podcast comes out, for a group of about 40 leaders of an organization that I do some coaching and leadership development for. And so I was live and I'm in person, and we were talking about our brand of leadership and how we develop that and how we communicate that. And my proposition is that it comes from the authenticity of who we are. Like, it's birthed out of our purpose, our passion, and our principles. And that's how we begin to understand who we will be as a leader, because it's who we are. And so at one point, somebody spoke up and said, I don't believe we have a purpose. And so I'm always just like, like, we're not put here for a purpose. But what I heard later on from somebody else that gave me feedback that was sitting with that person over lunch was they were extremely bothered by the fact that I continued to bring faith into the conversation, which I actually didn't that much. I talked a lot more about like we were created for and we were put here for. And so it's just natural language. And it's so interesting that it rubs people so wrongly. And that
wound is open, man.
Yeah, it is. It's just, it's so sad to see. But again, like, even I guess I just find myself, even when I'm not trying, it's just happening because it's just naturally who we are. Okay. So I love addressing that. And it's really having Siri loved it too. I love, addressing that. And I feel like that's a great place, because when we talk about something like that, like stewardship, without a foundation to stand on and a lens to look through, I think it just goes in a billion different directions, which is obviously a big part of the reason why we're in the place that we're in politically and socially, is because we all have the same kind of long-term intention, which is to do the best that we can for the people that live in the country that we're all a part of, right? Generally speaking,
it's your show. Right? I'll give it to you.
I mean, there's margins there, but I would say the mass majority. But because we're looking at that through a different lens, the way that we approach that looks totally different, right? Even if we're after the same outcome. Yes. Okay, so that's that part of it. There was another piece in there that you touched on that I really appreciate. And you talked about like there's this kind of like this time and this place, especially when we're talking about manhood, masculinity. There's kind of this moment, right? Or this season, or this this time in our life when all of a sudden we take responsibility. And I think that we're all inherently created with this desire to, in some sense, do good for others, right? We're bringing up our children to, care for the person that's marginalized. You see someone sitting by themselves at the lunch table, go sit with them. Right. When you have excess, give to somebody else. Or when you see somebody without, even if you don't have excess, give. So we're teaching that, they're feeling that, but I think what happens over a period of time, and I'm interested to hear your feedback, is more than, and I know you don't believe that it's like, when I turn 18, all of a sudden, like I'm an adult and now I'm accepting all of my stewardship responsibility as a man. Right. But I think that it's far more this gradual increase of wisdom and understanding in the role that we play, which is why for some guys, men specifically, and particularly today, we're seeing men not be men even in their 40s because they have not been given and equipped with the right type of wisdom to get them to that place, right?
Yeah, present company excluded, of course. I think it's so huge, because one thing I'm reminded of. So I have a kind of a pet project for the next 2 years. My son's 11; he's in 6th grade, and in our county or wherever district, middle school is 7th and 8th. Okay. So I'm homeschooling him 7th and 8th. And I remember reading a book about, it was a kind of a pro homeschool, even unschooling book. And the author recalls for us what life was like 100 years ago, before really formalized education, this whole thing. And he notes that there was no question about what your dad did, right? Because you were doing it alongside him every day. There was no question about, the family dynamic, or even I'm a big proponent of agency, of trying to create agency in my kids, because that's something you can't take away from them, right? But there are opportunities right there tangibly to, hey, do this, make this happen, whatever. And so I think a lot of times is we're farming out as parents this responsibility of, helping our boys and girls transform into men and women, because we're just not there. I mean, we're busy doing our thing in isolation, fragmented from the whole family dynamic. And so we get home, how's your day? Great. We get mad at our kids for giving us, fine as an answer, but that's kind of the same answer we're giving our wife for like how our day was, right? Like there's no shared experience. And I think that's where, if you want to talk about that, where that gradually gets caught more than taught, is this, what I'm hoping I get out of the next 2 years with Cole, is just this, come hang out and listen to me chat with Ryan and what we're talking about. Right. And one of the biggest benefits that I hoped for, but I didn't see happening so quickly, was how much he likes my podcast, how much he likes listening to me talk to other guys, largely, same as you, about different things and he's catching my take on that. And that's just not happening for so many kids. There's no intentional handoff, and there's not even an inadvertent handoff, other than work's really important. So go work. And they're okay. Well, I checked that box at 25. I'm miserable. But this is the only thing that I was really taught to do, or to give me validation.
It's so true. And I mean, this is one of the reasons why our society is in the place is that it is because so many men have abdicated their responsibility in society to be men. And
potentially unknowingly, not even casting blame. If you weren't given this idea, or that you should be responsible, or you don't know that you have these resources to steward, then who cares if I bail or not? Like, well, the effects, I'm not seeing the effects.
That was my life, and it's no excuse. I mean, I was raised by a single mom, and I saw my dad every other weekend, and we had a on again, off again relationship. And my mom was an amazing mom. I mean, she worked 2 and even 3 jobs sometimes just to make sure the roof stayed over the head, our head for my brother and I. We struggled. She suffered and sacrificed more than anybody. And everything that part of the reason why I am the person I am today is because of my mom. I would take nothing away from my mom. And yet some of the greatest and gravest mistakes I have made in my life were in part made, not taking away any of my own responsibility, but were in part made because of the absence of my father. And I don't blame him for that. That was the, outworking of my parents getting divorced and living 2 separate lives, and me being an active participant in fracturing some of that relationship with my dad at different seasons of life. But that's the reality. And people don't understand. Like today, there's just so many twists and distortions to a family unit and raising children and leading this nation and people. And I'm not taking anything away. Anybody that knows me knows that I would say that I elevate women in every opportunity possible. And believing in God, absolutely believe that men and women are equal in worth and value. And there is no question to that. But I deeply, deeply believe that there are separate responsibilities and callings that men and women have. And because of the distortion, because of men bailing on those responsibilities, we live in the state that we do. And we wonder why kids are as screwed up as they are, and why violence is at an all-time high, and why there are so many distortions in sexuality, and and a big part of that is because men have walked away from their responsibility.
Right. To really think of it in a simple metaphor, it's like if you're playing a sport, and like we'll go to baseball for this one, and the other team is just scoring run after run. Eventually be like, we really could use a right fielder, like it would be nice if we put just even as a placeholder till we find, just throw somebody out there. Right. So like for people who are saying, well, it's not that important, we can work around. Sure. But it is much nicer when you got it. I mean, it really hums when you have a dad in place, or a dad figure, like whatever it can be. Like there are so many opportunities for guys to step in and be leaders, and to bring somebody into kind of their world, their environment, and serving. It's so funny. I'm sitting in church the other day and I'm thinking, like, man, I wish Cole would sit next to other kids, because they're sitting in the church and the kids just playing on the phone or whatever. And then I'm recalling an email where they're saying, hey, if you're an adult and you want to volunteer for the students program, I'm like, oh, son of a gun. That's me. I got to go sit next to him. It's me. Oh, so this is an interesting paradigm that I've played with a lot too, is this idea of, so just off of somebody were like, oh yeah, man, this, blah, 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 blah. Right. So we've got the blame camp. And we've got the call often, I would say, I'm sorry, this is kind of middle of the road. The next call is like, okay, hey, this is responsibility, right? Like this is literally man up, right? Like that came from somewhere. Take responsibility for this thing. On the high side of that, though, I think we don't see opportunity. Blame and responsibility we got, but are like, okay, it's all bad, or it's just what you're supposed to do, which is obligation. And, that's not exactly aspirational. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait, this could be an opportunity. What is this an opportunity to do? And that's where I think guys who may try to avoid some of this stewardship concept, or that, this is tying it to manhood, is actually that opportunity, I think, to continue with what I started with as a core value, is legacy, is to be able to say, hey, what if I don't necessarily have a purpose, as your group participant objected to, but if I could make one, right? If I can, maybe I wasn't given a story, or I don't like the story I was given. What if I could write my own? But you can't until you start seeing these things like stewardship and responsibility as opportunity for you to be able to really channel what you've been given and be able to use that. I mean, that autobiography is nice, but the really good ones are the people who lived, who have scores of biographies written about them. And that's where the impact is really there.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that you opened up that avenue for a lack of opportunity, because I mean, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I know that's why you're doing what you're doing. And it's not a pitch for that, but it's because the gap is so disastrous. And it's scary to stand in that gap and lead the way with opportunity. I think that's been a big challenge, right? Because we are coming out of a generation, we're kind of similar in age, and, we're coming out of a generation that was pushing back against toxic masculinity. And so it's like, I don't want to speak up about manhood, because I don't want to be cast back into that camp that we're trying to like burn to the ground. And so that's there. And then now today in the society that we're in, again, with like 7,000 different messages being flung at you, it's kind of scary to stand up and say some change needs to happen, particularly as a male in society today. So I think there's some fear there. I think another big concern is that a lot of the images that we do see for masculinity today that are advertised before us for people that are trying to get something kind of right are the shredded, I'm wealthy, I've got my hot chick, and I drive a Ferrari or something like that. And so that's a really hard spot to step into. And yet I wish that we could see, I hate to say it this way, but we could build some more courage into the men today that see the problem that's there and create the opportunity. And it doesn't have to be the podcast. It doesn't have to be a coaching platform. It could be circle together with 5 of your guy friends and just start talking about what it means to be a man in the community that you live in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, and it's interesting too, to see where there are, by varying degrees, there are people, even just by who you choose to allow into your, I'll say, like, inner circle, even just by a selection process of, okay, yes, you can come hang out around my kids, or like, or I want to be more intentional with this guy, or whatever it might be. It doesn't even have to be formalized. Cause I think for guys that's a kind of an odd thing for them to say, oh yeah, let's start doing this or whatever. But I always think I'm a big fan of awareness, or putting a language to something, bringing somebody into consciousness, and just having that consciousness is behavior change, right? It's not even doing anything about it, but just be able to say, okay, now we've got this. And that's really, that's a big reason why you and I are in mastermind groups, right? Of we're being intentional about, at least for an hour a week, about who we surround ourselves with, so that we can start to have that be a true north every once in a while. Just, okay, get me back on track.
Yep.
Let me talk out something and, kind of work through something that I've been noodling for a while. And so we don't have that oftentimes, because our peer groups, the guys we hang out with, in large part, are based on proximity or common interest, which are nice, but it's that awareness of, man, I need some help in this area. Mm-hmm. Who else is like-minded of wanting to get help in this area and get up and be up that? Now I can pursue that. Now I can go look for that.
Yeah. And that's hard to find, right? It's not like you just Google, I'm a guy, how do I get help? Yeah. Like it's not that common. Okay. So I don't typically talk too much about business interests here, because I don't want it to be, here's the 7 steps to changing your life. But you specifically are just in this incredible season of effort of making an impact in this very arena. So let's talk a little bit about Made to Thrive, what you're doing, maybe just a little bit of background for sake of time on what got you to here, and then what you're doing and where you see yourself going, so people can kind of get a little bit of a vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's funny. It actually started with a physical move before maybe some other shifts. But one day I got a text from my wife at work that said, I think we're supposed to move to Colorado. And so we were in suburban Philadelphia, and I said, oh, okay, let's put the sign in the yard and see what happens. Cause I have a crazy idea a week, and she has a crazy idea once a decade. So I was like, all right, if you're bringing this, there's gotta be something here. So all right, I'm up. It was a crazy, probably 16, 18 months of picking up my family and moving across the country. Not all the way across. We didn't get as far as you, but
you're lucky. You're wise that you stopped.
we just got this weird feeling. But we hit suburban Denver, and I'm driving out. It's one of those, like, I've heard of people like us before, but I've never been them. We're driving out, and I'm going out to look for a job, because it is 100% of a, like, let's move and figure out what we're supposed to do when we get out there. So I got to find a job.
Wait, so freeze just for a second.
Yeah.
There was no calling for a job, nothing. It was just, we need to move. We're going to put the house up for sale. We're going to move to a brand new city, and then we'll figure it out.
As what a man. I'd heard of people like us before. And in a way, that was stewarding a call and a partnership with my wife it was not on the radar. We kind of loved our life, like, good job, good house, like, great friend, like, it was great. Yeah. So we're doing this. So I'm driving across the country, and I'm realizing this goes back to one of the things we were talking about before, is like, for 42 and a half years, I've had faith, but I haven't lived on faith.
Mm.
And I'm beginning to see the difference. You know, you've heard this before, probably, like what you believe in and what your beliefs are, what your convictions are. And you kind of find that out in these moments.
Yeah.
So my prayer driving out was, I don't want, this has been surprisingly fun because I'm a strategist. I'm a planner. Like I want to make things happen. Right. I was like, oh my word, I actually kind of really like not knowing what's happening next. So my prayer was, I don't want to get a house, get a job, find a church and settle into the same rut that I didn't know I was in back in Pennsylvania. And so that's kind of where part of the Made to Thrive was born out of, was just, man, like, let's dial in some of the talents I have, some of the ideas that I have, some of the things I'm passionate about. And what if we could just make a platform to show other people, really what is possible? And which is where I think where a lot of guys aren't, as Hemingway described bullfighters, living all the way up. We're kind of settling in because it's kind of easy because no one around us is really making us look bad. Like we've been operating by the Hippocratic Oath, and that's the bar. That's where the bar is. So anyway, so Made to Thrive has been a ton of fun, and I'm really excited about like pretty much a full launch that'll happen in early 2022. And but yeah, so that's kind of, it's an outpouring of keeping this going, of not needing to have everything figured out. Yeah.
Okay. So you have been podcasting for some time now. A big purpose in the podcast was to create all this content that you're then going to insert into the book that you're writing.
Yes.
That book is going to be a big part of the basis for how you will draw people into this ecosystem or community for what you're building.
Oh, the web, but I know what you're saying.
Okay. Thanks, Spider-Man.
And then luring them in.
and then what does that community look like in your dream state?
Yeah, absolutely. So to start out in particular, so that I've whittled down as tightly as I could 7 core areas where I think we can be doing better. And it's not it goes back to the same thing. It's not a blame thing. It's just two things. So one is, we usually gravitate toward being really good in 1 or 2 areas. It's usually our career. Maybe it's our health, hopefully some relationships, but it's usually just kind of a couple of those things. And we neglect, us included, we neglect the stuff that doesn't come as easily to us, or that's less tangible, right? Because what you measure, you treasure. And so the idea is to start with an assessment of, where am I in these 7 core areas? And like, just holding the mirror up, right? Like, we talked about before, if you don't like what you see in the mirror, it's not the mirror's fault, but then you're bringing that to consciousness. And so, and then being able to provide guys resources in those 7 areas. And so my ideal would be, as part of the community, you're saying, hey, this month I'm going to focus on my health. And so there's a pre and a post assessment. So you do the pre-assessment, you dig into some of the resources that are available there. Maybe it's through interviews, courses, whatever it might be. And then you do a post. And my real vision for this is to help guys create a virtuous cycle, which many people know and have experienced vicious cycles. Very few people talk about virtuous cycles. And I think when you have intention and you have, you've got some self-reflection, you're going to create transferable skills in those 7 core areas. And you're going to create a virtuous cycle that is continuous improvement. Again, not just for the sake of improvement, because then that improvement leads to greater influence, greater impact, greater mission in your life. And so that's my big picture vision of it. And also, frankly, just a platform to showcase other people's cool stuff, because I don't have it all. But if I can bring a bunch of people together under one umbrella and just say, hey, this month we're going to have, Ryan's going to come on and he's going to do a lesson. If you want to do an 8-week course with Ryan, boom, here you go.
Yeah. And I loved, I remember when we were talking months and months and months ago, and you were sharing that idea. And I think that there are a lot of similar things like that on the surface, in the sense that it's this big referral community that, you come into me, I refer you to my guy, it's like that. But I love the fact that your vision really is like, here are the areas that I see. I'm going to allow you to kind of self-select into the areas that you need greatest. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to give you the opportunity to choose an expert of sorts that sees things similarly to the way I see things, to help you fulfill this vision that you have for your life. When you're done there, it's not you're done and that's it, or I'm just going to keep you in my program in perpetuity. It's like, right, now let's figure out what's next so we can continue on in this cycle. So I love that, Sam. I mean, I just think it's so fantastic.
Yeah. Trying to build that assessment. That's where I think is the most important. And that's the thing I think that gets people started, is just saying, mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize, like we've talked about before with identity. Like, I didn't realize how low my identity score was. I wonder if that's holding me back in other areas. Answer is yes. And maybe this is the thing. I work on this. This might be the one thing, the one domino that pushes over a bunch of other things. I'm not into, like coaching, some coaching programs and other stuff like that. It's about, locking into a process. I'm about transformation. And I was just talking with a coach the other day, and she said, one of the things she enjoyed about her process is a lot of people decided in a very short period of time, I think I'm good. And like, that's great. I'm not trying to create dependency, right? The more you're good, the more the ripple effects that I'll never see are happening in your family. Right. Yes. And your ability to connect and like all these different things. So like, I love hanging out, but I want transformation. I mean, that's the biggest part.
That's so good, man. So good. Okay. I've never asked anybody this question either. It's actually going to be a series of 3 questions, but this is how I want to land. All right. So first off, what do you want your friends to say about you? And it can be as simple or as complex as you want.
I'll say, this will be a simple answer to it. He was nice first and funny second, because I've had a long history of making myself laugh, and the sarcasm meter maybe not being as dialed in. But I'll say comfort. Like, I was comfortable enough around him that I could talk to him about whatever I needed to.
That's good. Okay, same question. What do you want your son to say about you?
Which one? Just kidding. Everything that I set out to do, I already had approval for, because of who I was, not because of what the outcome I was going to get.
I almost don't even want to ask the last one, but I want to know. So what about your wife?
All right. Oh, this is a great weekend to be asking this question. We've had some deep talks about basically like where we want our family to go. No one, and this may be a parent cop out, no one could have been a better dad to my kids.
I love it, man. I love the direction that our conversation went in.
Scripted.
I never know where they're going. No. And I think that the answers to your final questions, which I didn't even know that I was going to ask them, perfectly articulated the answer to the first question that you gave. And I know that in between that, and for every single day of life that you live to this point, every single day that you will go on living, that none of that will be lived out perfectly. We're super thankful for the grace of God that continues to stand in every single gap that we fall short in. But I love that you image that so well, Sam. And I've been super pumped to get to know you, to share a little bit more here. I can't wait to see where not just Made to Thrive goes, though. I'm pumped to see where that goes, but I can't wait to see, and I hope that I'm around for years and years to come, or we stay connected for years and years to come, to see how your legacy continues to be left with your wife, your kids, and the men around you. Because as you said, there are a few things that are more important than that. And that's a stamp Absolutely. That we leave on history forever. So dude, thank you so much. I mean, it was Absolutely, such a pleasure.
Yeah. Really tons of fun, Ryan. Always cool to hang out with you. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Sam. All right, guys. Well, wraps up another episode of the podcast. As always, if you have feedback for the guest, in this sense, that was Sam, make sure to hit him up. We'll put contact information into the show notes. If you can't find that, don't know where to find that, hit me up and I'll get you his way. If you got anything for me, you know where to find me. In the meantime, be you, be happy, be authentic. Thanks, guys. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Authentic Conversations. If you are ready to live the life you've dreamed of, I'm here to help. Head to ryanjamesmiller.com/podcast to begin your journey. And if this episode impacted you in any way, pay it forward by sharing it with someone you know. I'm Ryan James Miller, and I'll see you next time on Authentic Conversations.